Hi everyone and welcome to the Odink School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I used to do these quite a bit where I would go for a walk and just talk about stuff, but I haven't done them in a while. And so that's too bad. I haven't really planned what I was going to say on this video at all. Migraines have been just terrible. I've been in a lot of pain, and ironically, well, maybe it's not ironic, I don't know. It's an interesting thing that my job primarily involves me thinking, and the nature of my injury makes it so I can't think. So it's like my thorn in the flesh, or I don't know, it's my recurring battle with the frost giants, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of a rather unique challenge when you're supposed to make videos and talk about what you know, but you can't really. So but it is what it is. There isn't anything that isn't a teacher. Pain is a fantastic teacher, and that's one of those things that people I don't think really know or understand, that like I hammer home to death, it feels like, the fact that chaos is a creative principle. And if you see your life, the things you do here, as essentially a job interview, well, it makes all of this a lot easier. It makes life a lot easier, because then a challenge will come and you think, oh, well, that sucks, but clearly it's meant to be a test. And if you see every challenge as a test and a teaching, if the universe trying to teach you, then life becomes super manageable, and it helps you to rise above a lot of the what's the word I'm thinking of? You don't get consumed by it, right? You don't get consumed by the struggles that happen in your life, because it's a learning opportunity. It's a test to see how you manage yourself, and that's a really important thing to kind of remember. So Wim Hof, for example, he's they call him the Iceman because he does ice baths and developed a whole new breathing method, meditation, and through meditation, like a meditative breathing. And he's super famous and super popular, and a lot of people really look up to him and use his stuff. But he's a classic example of gnosis through suffering. And I need to be kind of careful, because people will take this the wrong way and say that it's appropriate to hurt yourself to understand some deep truth. And that's not, you never, because that's a theft. That's called a self-theft, and that's very, very taboo. I've always maintained that all evil ultimately is theft, and self-thefts were always the big bad ones, because it takes a special kind of ignorance to steal from yourself. And self-harm is one of those things. However, with that said, there is pain does have certain, it does give you certain things if you know how to use it correctly. It's a There's a reason why people have used pain and discomfort as a way to achieve altered states of consciousness. I don't remember off the top of my head my dad's wife, Debbie. I should ask her actually, but I think it was Sundance. Someone out there could correct me, but I feel like it was the Sundance where the Native Americans would hang themselves from hooks and the like for like 3 days or something like that, for a long time. And it's excruciating, but through that experience you can achieve altered states and see visions and hear the voices of the ancestors or the gods, however you want to call it. Some cultures would do it through dancing, where they would dance around a fire for 24 to 48 hours straight. Same thing, exhaustion. There's a lot of ways to get to the other side. You don't have to hurt yourself to do that. But pain, I guess the whole point of all this is just to say that pain is a teacher. And even though you're in pain and it hurts and you'd rather not be in pain, if you understand the principle of it, it's a very good teacher to help you get and discover new parts of yourself. So, and that's I said in, I don't remember which video it was. I don't remember how many videos away it was. Maybe it was my last full video where I discussed how all work is self-work. You ultimately are the center of your own solar system, your own universe. You're created in the image of the all, whatever that is. Whether it's the Tao or the world tree or the creator of all things, as the Christians would have it. You are, for all intents and purposes, it. And we could get into more of that at some other point. But people don't want to take responsibility for themselves. It's always someone else's fault. And like I got this, it really made me laugh on my the video where I discussed how in my past I was an incel. Back before all of this, before I discovered what everything was about. And the whole point of the whole video was self-responsibility. How if everyone is saying that there's a problem, it's not everyone having a problem with you. There's something going on, and you have the power to do something about it. And self-responsibility. If you're having trouble getting girls, there's something you could do about that. If you take responsibility, you do the work, you do what you need to do, then you could get girls. And there really wasn't very many comments on that video, but it was amusing that the two people who did comment were complaining that it wasn't their fault, it's everyone else's fault. It's like either you didn't watch the video or you're super dense. It just amuses me. But everything ultimately is your fault because you're it. You're the center of the universe. You're the center of your own story. And so I kind of forget now where I was going with this. So you're responsible for your own consciousness. You're responsible for the way you treat others. You're responsible for not just the things you do, but the universe reacts. How do I put this? And I might be getting outside of what I'm allowed to talk about. But okay. The universe is a reflecting pool. What it is and how it behaves is in direct response to who you are and how you behave. We see this all the time in politics and in what they call the culture war, I guess, where if you see racists around, if you believe there are racists around every corner, there suddenly becomes racists around every corner. If you're afraid of fascism, the rise of fascism will rise. The universe creates it. If you see every woman as an enemy, someone who's going to hate you, then every woman will see you as an enemy and they'll hate you. If you see yourself coming into wealth, I do not agree with using this philosophy for self-gain, but you listen to enough interviews through billionaires, you'll notice that right away, one of the things that they always say over and over again is that they pictured themselves, they saw themselves as wealthy even before they ever became wealthy. They saw themselves as successful before they ever became successful. It's called spinning the wheels of creation. And it's, like I said, it's a reflecting pool. What you put into it is what you get out of it. And so if you decide that what you want is the mysteries, what you want is wisdom, the universe will feed that back to you. And again, I'm walking right on the edge of what I'm allowed to talk about. So I'm gonna have to be kind of careful. So, and this is why, I've talked about this. I think I talked about it in the, I feel like it was my last video, about how all work is self-work. And we went over the things when someone asked me to be their teacher or to at least help them get started. I always ask them what they want. Always. It's always what I do. First thing, what do you want? And that's partly because I want to know what the metal is. I also want to know if they're going to be someone who's going to take the time to actually think about it. Some do, some don't. But primarily, the reason you do these, you ask this question, is because you don't know if you don't know where you're going, you'll just wander. If you don't know why you're going where you're going to have a real hard time. And so by establishing right from the get-go what it is that you want, then you start spinning the wheels of creation and you'll find yourself getting whatever that is. It's and trying to figure out what you want isn't as easy as it sounds. We've talked about this before. Knowing where you're going isn't as easy as it sounds. Because there's a lot of red herrings in there. There's a lot of things that we think we want, but we really don't in reality. You know, there's an old saying, and I think it's worth it to point it out, is that the grass is always greener. You know, so, you know, when I was young, and I think a lot of guys would relate to this, you know, when you're young, you think, I would not have lived unless I've had sex. You know, you think partly it's the media, partly it's just the way it's advertised, and, you know, it's put on this mythical plane. You think that, you know, until you've had sex, you haven't lived, and then you end up having sex, you're like, okay, well, my life hasn't fundamentally changed in any way that I thought it would, you know. Marriage is kind of the same way, you know. By the time I got married, I was, you know, living with my wife for a few years, and our finances were already intertwined, and we're already sharing a bed, and, you know, it was like, did that really, it's like getting married was really more for the family than it was for us personally. So getting married, did it fundamentally change my life? No, not really. And this is the thing with the underworld, with this plane, is that there's a lot of things that we're told that we should want, that we feel that we need. But it's a thirst that is never quenched. There's always, once you get it, you always want more or something different. And it's the, I think it was the Buddhists? Hindus? I don't remember. But there's a belief in one of those Eastern philosophies, and I frankly agree with it 100%, that the pursuit of pleasure is the descent into the hells. That if you worship pleasure and you try and your whole life is about fulfillment of base things, money, sex, you know, obtaining pleasure and that kind of stuff, eventually it leads into abject suffering. And we, you know, just look at, have you seen Katy Perry lately? You know, she looks like someone who's been used up. and it's you don't look at her and say that is someone who is happy. And so the trick when you're trying to discover what you want is, get myself dead arm. I don't have the fancy phone holders. I'm holding it with my hand, like the old-fashioned way. So you have to sort out through all this bullshit. You want to find out what you want. And then, you have to figure out, okay, you think for a second, okay, I want power. And we've talked about this before. You say, I want power. Well, no, you don't. Power is just a means to get what you think you want, right? It's a currency. And true power is something that no one could take away from you anyway. And so you are not going to find what you want by just seeking power, because you could have all the power in the world and still not know what you want. People say they want money. You don't really want money. Not really. Money has been shown over and over again not to, for one, never to make anyone feel any particular amount of fulfillment. And two, money is just a means, like power. It's just another means to getting to the bottom of what it is you want. And it's tricky. So you keep bumping into these red herrings, and you have to think, okay, is this really what I want? And in my own journey, eventually I came to the realization that I wasn't wise enough to even know the answer to that question. And that was a tough thing to come to. And you realize you're not as smart as you think you are. But doing that self-work, spending the time to figure that kind of thing out, so you even know where you're traveling to, is the first step. It's the first step into calling that into your life. And so there's this, for those of you who have read the Kybalion, you'll know, you'll be aware of this. But there's this thing called the master key. We could get into what a key is later. I keep promising to, but I never do. There's a thing called a master key, and the master key is a set of 7 Hermetic principles that if you understand these 7 principles, both in their entirety, meaning as a whole group of principles, and individually, it will unlock the universe. And so far, my experience is absolutely correct in that assumption. But one of the principles is, I think it's no, it's not the principle of vibration. It's the principle of crap. I think it's the principle of correspondence. Anyway, the principle goes, the measure of the pendulum's swing to the right is the measure of the pendulum swing to the left. Because everything in the universe is a sine wave. Everything is it's all sound and light. Ultimately, when you boil everything down to its base components, it's all vibration, it's all light, it's all basically ethereal nothingness. Because you get down to the Planck state where it's just these little balls of energy that just pop in and out of existence. Okay, my camera's over here. Anyway, so everything is wave. And so the problem that people have is they think that a successful life is a happy life. And so, and they believe in their hearts, way down deep in their hearts, whether they know it or not, they believe that the point of life is to be happy. And so they bump into this problem where they live life and they're not happy, and so they think that there's something fundamentally wrong with the process. I'm not happy. I'm poor, or I'm on drugs, or I have too much sex, and that's actually something that can make someone deeply unhappy. And so you have this problem, and we like we talked about again. The worship of pleasure is a descent into the hells. It's like the more and more extreme the thing has to be. But because you have this pendulum swing, and if you're trying to seek happiness, every time you push energy into that, it creates a sine wave. And each time you have a wave, you have to, by law, you have to go into the nighttime side of that wave, where you go underneath, and now you're in the underworld down here. And you have another up. So a little bit like with the Zen, what they talk about with the sorry, something just went off in my ear. I don't know how to turn it off when I'm doing this. Anyway, hopefully that didn't show up in the audio. Like what the Zen masters talk about, and this is kind of the whole point of Zen, is this phenomenon where if you try and push too far to happiness, for example, then you end up having to go into that descent into the hells, where you have that alternate bent where all of a sudden you're really happy, but then you have a giant plummet into depression and despair. And likewise, if you go into too far into asceticism, asceticism is like you take a vow of poverty, you take a vow of silence, and there's kind of this this happens a lot with really religious societies, where they say that basically the worldview is that I know I'm right so long as I'm suffering. The more self-pain and the hungrier I am and the colder I am and the more uncomfortable I am and the more isolated I am, the holier I become. And it's you have kind of a similar problem, where if you try and answer this question of the suffering you get through pleasure, right? If you try and answer that with like, okay, well, I'm just going to suffer then. Well, then you still have this other thing that happens, right? You still have that sine wave that will come in, and I don't agree with that. The middle way, like what Lao Tzu would say, I'm not really sure how to say his name the correct way, but he's the one who wrote the Tao Te Ching, or the Tao Te Ching, and a lot of like the other esoteric orders where it's called the middle way. You're neither choosing the right-handed path or the left-handed path. There's a balance that must be maintained. And so the way to avoid extreme depression, the way to avoid extreme mania, which is extreme happiness to the point of where it's bad, is to walk the middle way, is to in neither seek pleasure or seek suffering. You kind of take a detached view of the world and maintain an even keel. And you avoid a lot of the pitfalls by doing that. You avoid a lot of the emotional ups and downs by taking on that challenge, where you realize that I don't have to suffer, and I also don't need to seek pleasure either. And that's a tough thing to kind of get your mind around. But when you master it, life is much more manageable, because you're not creating tsunamis for yourself. You're not getting pounded over and over again by these waves because you're trying to fight to be happy, or fight to suffer, or create these huge energetic waves that keep lapping up against your shore, and you get pounded by them over and over again. You're like, what the hell's going on with me? And that's rather important to. And yeah, I feel like I'm all over the place today. Like I said, my brain has been kind of effed up just due to the winter season, and barometric pressure changes are huge migraine triggers for me, and it's winter time in the Northwest, and so I'm just being pounded to death by these waves that are coming in, and it's been really rough. And so I kind of thought that maybe just a stream of consciousness video would be better suited to what's going on with me right now, and kind of play to my strengths. I do really good if I just talk, and so yeah, this isn't really designed to be, what's the word? It's not really designed to be organized. But yeah, it's really, because now I'm thinking about the Tao. Tao is how it's spelled. It's spelled like Tao, but it's actually pronounced Tao. It's really interesting, because I spent some time reading the Hermetica again. I read there's a new version that came out, which I'm not going to go all the way and say that it's my favorite version, because they cut out a lot of the good stuff. But it's the Hermetica, and I'm trying to remember who the authors were, where they kind of streamlined it, made it more palatable to an English-speaking audience, and the original writings of Hermes were written in the form of dialogues, and that was really a common. A lot of Greek philosophy was written that way, where you have the master and the student. The student will ask the master a question, and then the master will answer it. And so they took away all of that, the question answer thing, and just had kind of wrote it in the form of poetry, which is fine. I like to stay as close to the original as I can, but anyway, I had time on my hands, and so I read it. And one of the things I thought was really interesting is, if you listen to Lao Tzu, for example, talking about the Tao, and I think I added the Tao Te Ching to the playlist of the mysteries. the if you listen to the way he describes the Tao, and you listen to the way, let's say, the Gnostics would explain the all, like if you went and read the Apocryphon of John, for example, and the Gnostic texts, and then you listen to what they're talking about in the Hermetica, with the name Autumn, spelled just like the season, Atum, and then you listen to the way, then if you understand like the world tree philosophy of the energetic system and all of that, you realize pretty quickly that they're really all talking about the same thing. So I found that was really fascinating. And just the different way the different cultures saw the all, saw whatever the fundamental underlying principle of the whole thing. Like the Chinese with the Tao, for example, it's not really, they don't really describe it in a way that is like a consciousness. Or they don't anthropomorphize it. You know, like the Christians, for example, and the Gnostics, you know, they'll see this force as almost as like a father figure, where it has a personality and it has it thinks and feels and has opinions on things and that kind of stuff. The Chinese, they would say the Tao is an energy source, right? And you have to align yourself to the energy source. And if you do things that are outside the vibrational span of the energy source, so like if you commit murder or something like that creates a dissonant tone, you know, you get bombarded with those karma, I guess you could call it, those waves that come up and beat you up for that wrong action. But they don't really have it they don't really see it as a living, well, how do I put it? Not a living thing. They don't see it as like, say, the Western person would see God, right? And the Norse are kind of there, but not quite to that extent, where all things come out of the world tree, and everything is fed by the world tree. And so you could say that the world tree is essentially the Tao. It's that energetic thing that feeds all living things. And I know it's controversial to say, but you know, I've always maintained that the Norse did actually have a creator of all things. It's just not in the Judeo-Christian, or I should say the Abrahamic way of viewing a creator, right? It's its own thing. Shiva is kind of that way too. Shiva, in a way, could be expressed as the world tree, where energy is both being created and destroyed at the same time. But it was just really kind of fascinating just to see the differences because they're all, and the thing is, you know, it's like there's a fundamental truth that underlies everything. And different cultures will see the truth, and through their cultural lens will do their best to describe it in their own cultural way of looking at things. So Lao Tzu, for example, will see the truth, but you know, he lived in a time and a place where that wasn't the Western idea of God really wasn't there. There was no Western idea of God, but he understood that there was a fundamental force in the universe that must be obeyed and the laws must be kept in order to live a life without too much trouble, you know. So like he understood even without a Western conception of God, which is like a self-willed father figure who has a personality who wants to, you know, teach you. He didn't see that. All he knew was that there's a force that must be obeyed, and if you live a life according to the nature of whatever that force is, then you have a life of joy. Because there's a difference between being happy and having joy, right? One is more primal, and one is more superficial. One is, it's like they say, you can't measure climate change by looking at the weather. You can't just look outside and say, this storm that we're looking at right now is due to climate change. You can't do that. It's kind of the same thing. It's like happiness is the weather as it is right this second, and joy is more of a long-term, primal, deep-seated trend that is developed over a long period of time. Anyway, so it's just really fascinating. And then you look at the Egyptians, you know, kind of fed through the Greeks. So there's a little bit of Egyptian, a little bit of Greek in there, but they're kind of like this really cool tween, a little bit like the Norse are this way too, which I think is really fascinating. There's a lot of the Egyptian philosophy and the philosophy of the Norse, are very, very similar in nature. But they have kind of a tween version where it's not quite full Western. It's not quite the full Western way of looking at it. Or let me amend myself. The way that the Hermetica presents it is very specific. The way the Hermetica presents the Egyptian philosophy, is that it's not quite the creator of all things, like Atum, isn't just he's someone we conceptualize as a person, but isn't actually a person. It's more of an energy, a fundamental consciousness that permeates reality. And so so he kind of straddles that whole Western, Eastern philosophy, you know, which makes me think that, I mean, if you listen to Graham Hancock, who's he's kind of a historian, anthropologist guy. You know, he wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, for example, and you have John Anthony West, the late great John Anthony West, and some of these others who believe that we're not the first civilization on Earth, and you know that our whole worldview came out of a single knowledge base. But the reason everyone has the same opinion is because it's all came out of one opinion, with some changes to culture and, you know, that kind of thing. But and I really see that. It's like everyone is trying to measure the same phenomenon. Everyone is trying to measure the same phenomenon. And some are successful, some aren't. But everyone is trying to do the same thing. And that's the thing when we deal like with symbology and this sort of thing is all occult sciences, all esoteric philosophy, all the as Madame Blavatsky would say, the secret doctrine. If you, well, it's talking about 45 minutes now. I'm about ready to get off. Anyway, they're all measured the same thing. All symbolism is measuring the same thing, and it's trying to explain one thing and different elements of that one thing. Which is why, if you're initiated, you can read the symbols of other esoteric organizations. You know, that's not a blanket statement. I mean, there's still things that you're like, I'm not sure what they're, but you can figure it out. You know, it's a little bit like trying to read Sanskrit, so you have to like walk it through a couple of languages in order to kind of get to where you're going. Similar idea, right? I'm not a Mason. I came up through a different mystery school, but I could look at Masonry and say, okay, I understand the philosophy. I see where they're coming from this, and you could work out the symbols. But yeah, that's my stream of consciousness video. It's a good day. I like gray days. Makes my spirit bubble to the surface. It makes me wondrous. By wondrous, I mean it makes me filled with wonder. You know, it's like, wow. There's so much cool stuff to think about. So much beauty, you know. I wish technology could capture how beautiful everything is. Like it washes out I'm looking at my screen here, and it washes out the whole sky. You don't see the beautiful grays and blues, and it's like paintbrushes in the sky. It's amazing. Anyway. Well, I've been talking for long enough. I love you all, and I will talk to you all later. All right? Bye.